So how are we going to live in the light in the midst of the darkness? We have to remember that darkness is the absence of light. And so in this episode of Jedi Pastor Ken, I want to talk about light in light of light. That's kind of confusing, but stay with me. This is Ken Hagler, pastor and author, and that's what I want to talk about on this episode, the light side. Hey, this is Ken Hagler, Jedi Pastor Ken. I'm so glad that you showed up and stopped in for this episode. I want to talk specifically about the idea of the light side. Last week in a previous episode, I talked about the dark side and motivations within inside of us. And when we look back over this past week, we've seen the terrible motivations of somebody that had evil in his heart, that would plan and carry out an attack that killed innocent people and wounded so many others. And we've seen this over and over again in our world. The writer of Proverbs has a very unique perspective on this whole thing, though. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, God has a very different perspective because light and dark are not the same. God has already won. There's nothing to fight about. We sit in the middle of the struggle that still takes place here because darkness is always trying to overcome the light, but it can't. And one of the things that we have to do is we have to unlearn what we have learned in many ways, that there are equal sides in this battle. Our spirituality, our hope, and our faith rest and only rest when we put that faith in God, the one who is truly light. So I want to talk a little bit more today about this very specific issue about light. As Yoda said, you must unlearn what you have learned. God's love is never separated from our fear of God. But fear of God in the Bible isn't about trembling and being terrified of God. It's about honoring God and putting God in the ultimate place in our lives. Jewish theologian Abraham Heschel said these words, God is of no importance unless God is of supreme importance. The first fruits of fearing God is that we begin to look at God as a refuge and fountain of life. Proverbs says this,
in the fear of the Lord, one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death.
The second of the fruits about fearing God is we have a contentment.
Better to have a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and turmoil.
The third fruit that comes along with fearing God and walking in the light is that we have a true recognition of evil.
By mercy and faithfulness, peace is made with the Lord. By the fear of the Lord, evil is avoided.
The fourth and final fruit of fearing God is that we develop a healthy view of hope and of life.
The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. The reward of humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life.
We've been looking at Proverbs, but I don't want to leave out the New Testament, because oftentimes people will say the God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament. But the book of Acts tells us that the early church feared God and walked accordingly, and that the church grew because of that. James writes that we ought to be doers of the word and not just hearers only. See, the darkness and evil is always going to be about doing things that try to quench the light. But again, darkness is merely the absence of light. Take away light, you have darkness. Bring light into the room, and darkness flees. That's not just an analogy, it's a reality. And so as we begin to walk in the light, as we make the decisions in our lives to walk that way, it makes a difference in the world that we live. If you found these words to be encouraging, and I hope and pray that you do, I want to invite you to like this video, to subscribe, and certainly share it with your friends and family. Until we see each other again in the next video, though, I pray that the Force be with you and that you will take the light into a world that needs to see it.